of Cheers to Careers. I'm Steve Ridinghouse, the Career Outreach Coordinator at the School of Journalism and Mass Communications at KU.
We are back for another episode of Cheers to Careers. This is number 78, and we are joined by Eric Weslander, former journalist, now partner at Stevens & Brand. Welcome, Eric.
Thanks, Steve. Great to be here.
So I think you are my third guest that former journalist became attorney. Was that always part of the plan?
Yes and no. I would say, I think coming into KU, I didn't necessarily know what I wanted to do as a freshman. I knew I was interested in journalism. By the time I graduated from KU, I, like a lot of, I think, journalism grads, was thinking about law school and the idea of going to law school. And so I think I studied for the LSAT and things like that, but I didn't end up taking it. And instead, I went to work for about eight and a half years as a journalist, full-time daily newspaper journalist at that time. And then covering the courthouse, my last gig when we worked together, I was working at the Journal World here in Lawrence, and I covered the courthouse for probably 4 years and saw so much in the courtroom, met a lot of attorneys and judges, and realized that that was something that I was still interested in doing.
And I know when I've talked to former journalists, now attorneys, even current students, there are a lot of transferable skills, right? I mean, just the ability to interview, get to the point, tell that story, research. Was it a pretty natural transition?
It was, and I will say this, that having worked in the field for the better part of a decade, I was much more prepared than I think I would have been had I gone straight through. Not that that's not a viable option, a lot of people do it. But not only did I learn a lot in journalism school, but I learned a lot as a journalist, a working journalist, that I think prepared me for law school and the practice of law, particularly deadline pressure, working under pressure, gathering information, organizing a lot of complex information, and really the people skills that come with being a journalist, having to deal with sources and interview people, deal with conflict.
Right.
I think I was much more prepared for that than I would have been otherwise had I not had those years working as a reporter and had I not had the journalism school experience.
And what are some of your law specialties? I know media law is definitely a specialty of yours.
Yes, I am very happy, honored to have been able to make part of my practice, a First Amendment practice, media law practice. We represent media entities. I've had a number of cases that are typically defamation defense is where it will come up. You will also, from time to time, have issues with news gathering, trying to help a news organization get documents, fight attempts to subpoena a reporter or their notes or their information. So I've dealt with probably all of those within the last year or so, and like having that as a part of practice. I've done some First Amendment litigation on behalf of, for example, some students who were censored in a protest about 5 years ago, high school students who did a walkout against gun violence. And shortly before the walkout, were told by the administration, well, here's what your script is, here's what you can say, and here's what you can't say. And so we brought, working with the ACLU, a Section 1983 civil rights violation lawsuit in that case. So some First Amendment matters, defamation law is kind of a hot area of the law, and I do some of that. Maybe a quarter of my caseload at any time has to do with media matters, and then the rest, I would say, is, I would call it civil litigation, disputes, business disputes, personal injury, property, typically defense, entrepreneurs trying to go out on their own and start their new business and facing issues with a non-solicit or a non-compete, helping them through that. Usually I get involved when there's already a dispute, as opposed to planning, estate planning, things like that. Things have already, led to some level of a disagreement or dispute. By the time I get involved, and typically somebody is suing or being sued.
Okay. And I would think you take a lot of pride in that, helping out, young journalists. And then I know we're about, a little over a year removed from the Marion County Record, and you were involved in that a little bit too, like the raid of the newsroom there. Correct.
Yeah, we represent the office manager in that case. There are probably 4 or 5 different lawsuits pending right now over this raid of the newspaper by law enforcement in the small town of Marion, Kansas. And absolutely, it's an honor and a privilege to be involved in those cases, not only to reinforce protections for news gathering. Freedom of the press is under attack today, so to be able to vindicate those interests and represent the staff of the newspaper is something that I take very, very seriously, like any case, but it has a special meaning having been a journalist and also getting to work with, on those cases, some mentors and people that I've had that have helped me in my career to learn things about media law. It's a really bad thing that happened there, in my view, and it can't happen again.
What was your reaction when that first happened? Because that was pretty unusual. I mean, there was a lot of kind of red flags at the very beginning. It's like, how could this happen?
Shock, disbelief, and trying to work with Bernie Rhodes, who's a media law attorney and a mentor of mine who practices in Kansas City, somebody that helped me learn a lot about the practice of law, and actually was our attorney long ago at the Journal World, which is kind of fun to be able to work with somebody who previously represented you, but starting right away to work on, what's the response and figuring out, where to go from there. There's been, I think, it's been encouraging to see that there's been a lot of support for the staff of the newspaper and recognition that what happened there was wrong.
And going back to your reporting career, I know before the Journal World, I believe you were in Louisville and then Tucson?
Correct, yes.
Now, was Louisville your first job after graduating?
I worked in summers between my, I think, sophomore and junior year and senior year at KU. I worked at first the Louisville Courier-Journal, which was kind of my hometown metro area newspaper. Then I worked at the Kansas City Star between my junior and senior year. Graduated from KU, I started as a cub reporter at the Southern Indiana Bureau of the Louisville Courier-Journal, and was there for just a short time. My wife got into grad school and we moved to Tucson, so I transferred to the Tucson Citizen, which was an afternoon newspaper, had 2 daily newspapers, if you can imagine that, in the early 2000s. And I spent a couple years working in Tucson there covering higher education and politics toward the end, and then came back up to Lawrence, moved back here, family is here. The Midwest is home, and we were pretty far away out in the desert. And so when I started, it was 2002. You were working there at the Journal World at the time, and so I was there from 2002 to 2007.
How did you get to KU in the first place? Did you have a KU
Midwestern
connection?
Music Camp is how they got me, I think, looking back on it, because I had lived in Johnson County 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th grade, and I went to music camp. My music teacher at Rose Hill Elementary, Sherry Romiser, suggested that we go to music camp, students go to music camp. So I came and I stayed at Oliver Hall as a 7th grader and, walked around on campus. And I realized years later, and then I started getting mailings with Jayhawks on them and things like that, and was into KU basketball and stuff. But we moved away, and when I thought about where I wanted to go to school, KU seemed familiar. I realized when my daughter went to Midwestern Music Camp and she started getting all these mailings, you look like a Jayhawk, and bumper stickers showing up. I remember it was not until then that I realized that was how they got me.
And what was your instrument?
I played violin and keyboards, and a little bit of singing.
It's quite a variety. And I know, are you still doing some teaching of media law, or?
I'm not. I haven't taught in a while. I taught for, I guess, 3 or 4 semesters at Washburn University, undergrad mass media law, and that was a blast, but I haven't done that in a while.
And how has, media law changed? I mean, I took media law here at KU, but that was before internet, before social media. I would think media law is pretty challenging to stay on top of everything. Or is it still kind of the foundation still there from late 80s, early 90s?
Obviously technology having changed so much since a lot of the case law that is familiar, if you've studied media law, New York Times v. Sullivan and all of the cases, the Supreme Court body of case law that came after that was mostly decided in an era that we wouldn't recognize today in terms of the media landscape. But the principles are the same. I think, at the end of the day, there are some nuances around things that are published online with what's known as the Communications Decency Act. Section 230 provides immunity, legal immunity for publishers like your Facebooks, your X or Twitter. They are not liable for third-party posts that users post by statute. And so that creates some interesting case law. There's been a trend in the last 20 or so years to have what's called an anti-SLAPP law under state law that gives you a way to get rid of, early on in the case, meritless defamation lawsuit, one that's really just intended to kind of bully people or silence critics. So we have a new statute in Kansas as of about 2016 that's still, the case law is still playing out on that. And so things are always changing. I think the fundamentals are still the same. The First Amendment hasn't changed. And the Kansas Constitution, which also protects freedom of the press and free speech, has not changed. But the law always kind of struggles to keep up with technology. And it is a hot area of the law. Defamation seems to be much more popular as something to, threaten to threaten someone with a lawsuit compared with when I got into the legal profession, 15 years ago.
And speaking of kind of that foundation, I know you had some leadership positions at the UDK.
Yes.
What was that experience like, being part of a student staff? I think you did like campus editor, and sports editor, so it looked like you had your hands in multiple areas of the newspaper.
I did. I got involved very early on as a freshman, Kansan correspondent. I took my very first journalism class in room 100 there at Stauffer Flint, just down the hall, still there. This nice space was not here back then. But I think I did like stringer work for the Kansan, as right off the bat as a freshman, and then by the time I was a sophomore, I did advanced reporting, which was, your daily, you pretty much give up your whole semester, you lighten your class load, and you work on the Kansan, and back then, I don't know how it's done now. But then I became campus editor, a co-campus editor with my good buddy Dave Morantz, who went on to go to law school, and a great friend years later, and then was the sports editor for one semester. I think I wrote some sophomoric callow columns for the Kansan as an opinion columnist, and then my senior year, I think I dialed it back a little bit and did other things. But it was great. I mean, it was a wonderful experience and met so many great friends and family. My wife and I worked on the Daily Kansan together, and my brother-in-law, sister-in-law. It was, looking back on it, it's a family affair, and at the time, and I should also mention, my father-in-law is Rick Musser, who for many, many years was a journalism professor, reporting professor. He was my advisor, former advisor for the Daily Kansan. And so again, when we have family get-togethers, it feels like there's a lot of Kansan representation there.
Now, is your wife, is she still doing any journalism?
She has done a lot over the years. She does mainly now some travel writing. She's had a number of different positions in communications. She's worked for the Kansas Land Trust. She's worked for the Merck, and done a lot of freelance writing of her own. So yeah, it's in the family.
So what advice do you have? I'm a career advisor here at the journalism school. That student comes in, hey, I like journalism, but I've always wanted to pursue law. Is that a good path to take? What advice would you have as they consider that?
I think it is a good path to take, definitely. And I think journalism teaches you so much that is valuable, as I talked about earlier, that translates to any other number of fields. Figuring things out, having the resourcefulness, the determination, creativity, the grit to pursue answers, the curiosity to want to find answers, and but also really importantly, the writing, the kind of the pressure cooker that is being a journalist and a journalism student, where you have people who are critiquing your work in a very visible public fashion, whether it's hanging the critique on the wall and writing it with red pen, this is horrible, you just and your name is right there on it and all your friends are looking at it. Over time you get, I think, a thicker skin, and that helps with, not only being out in the working world, but it helps in the legal world, I think, sometimes to help me dial back some of the personality conflicts a little bit, because you get so used to being critiqued. And so I think, you're going to learn great skills as a journalism student, and I think, just go for it, jump in and get as much out of the experience as you can. Don't worry so much about the career path part of it, because you'll make these relationships, you'll get those skills that will benefit you, even if it takes a few years for it to, for that to all show itself. But in terms of the law as a next step, I will tell you, Steve, it opened up for me a number of opportunities career-wise that I would not have had I stayed in journalism, particularly wanting to be in this area. We were kind of tied to Lawrence. And back when I decided to go to law school, 2007, I probably could have counted on one hand the number of potential jobs that I could have gone to that wouldn't have involved moving to a different market. And so that was the reality. And but by going to law school, it did open up a number of opportunities. I think if you go to law school, you can practice law, you can work in government, you don't have to ever be an attorney, you just learn from the experience, and you can do any number of things. But I can't separate them. For me, I would not, I think, have been as good of a law student in terms of my practices and how I went about it. I wouldn't have learned as much, I wouldn't have taken it seriously, I wouldn't have gotten nearly as much out of it, and I wouldn't have been in the position to have the kind of practice I have had I not gone to journalism school and learned so much and met so many great people, and had I not worked out in the field as a journalist for a while.
And when you went to law school, did you get done in 3 years? I mean, were you committed? It's like, I got to get done in 3 years, or did you have much choice?
I did. No, I went to Washburn. I had scholarships that dictated I get through it, and I was ready to finish by the time I was done with it. And I will say I was really raring to go to start as a student coming back. I think I was 30. One of my small section people would call me the grandpa of the law school class at the ripe old age of 30. But I remember thinking, I'm so ready to go and study, I can't wait, and I can't get fired from being a student. Right. Whereas in working for the journal world, I mean, we had it was a challenging, demanding place to work.
And I would think the fact that you had that real world experience probably helped a lot. I mean, rather than, say the 22-year-old going straight to law school. I mean, you probably brought that to the classroom, I would think.
I did. Yeah. I was serious about it. I was ready to go. But I also think, again, from all the years of having to study, thick reports and write about governmental things, I just had more of a familiarity with that, with digging in and reading through, boring documents and things like that. But I also, I worked a lot to get ready for the LSAT. I practiced and I practiced on the different tests. But again, I think I was better at things like reading comprehension or logical reasoning from having to be out there on the front lines doing daily journalism work for a long time. And I was just really motivated.
And you probably had to enhance your wardrobe too? Did you have to come with a new wardrobe to be an attorney, or is this how you dress every day?
The ink-stained wretch part doesn't play quite as well in the courtroom, but I think there were probably some people who would still question whether my fashion game. I definitely had to dress it up a little bit here coming to see you today, but
I mean, they wanted us to wear ties.
That's true. So we did. We had. That helped me learn. I could learn to tie a knot, and that really was. I'd kind of forgotten about that aspect.
And that's why I felt I had to dress up today, because I knew you'd be bringing the jacket game. So. Well, hey, I know you got a busy schedule, and you got, a judge to meet, so I want to move on to Fast Five before you go.
Okay.
A little fun. So past or present, what's your favorite law-themed TV show? Do you have a favorite?
Ooh.
Or what's the most realistic?
Oh, gosh. Well, I used to watch a lot of Law & Order. I like Law & Order. I'm going to just say The Wire. That might be an overly used one, but I really enjoyed The Wire. And although I will say just about any TV show, you could probably draw some parallel to the law. So Game of Thrones probably doesn't count, but I'm going to go with The Wire. Okay.
So Netflix calls already do the biopic on Eric Weslander. Who plays Eric in the biopic?
Jake Gyllenhaal.
Oh, that'd be a good fit. I can see that. What is the first TV news story you remember watching live or in print? Was that the first story that really caught your attention as a kid?
Challenger exploding, I would say.
86,
probably, okay. Yeah. I think that's probably it.
Because how old would you have been?
I would have been in third grade.
Wow.
And I think, I can't remember if we watched it live.
In classroom, yeah.
Or we watched the highlights they called us in. But I definitely remember that. That stands out.
Okay.
Yeah.
I noticed on your online bio you were part of an intramural swimming team championship. What event did you swim?
I swam the 50 fly.
Okay.
And I swam one leg of the relay. I think I probably also swam butterfly in the relay leg. Yeah, I had a class I took a swimming class at Robinson, And so we would get up and swim at like 5:30 every morning or 3 days a week.
Wow.
And so a lot of them were, I was not one of the faster ones, but a lot of them were, former swimmers at a high level. And so we really just had the better numbers. So the way they score it, we just had more people, but we still won.
I didn't know they had an intramural swimming program here. I also noticed on your bio, I don't know if you still practice yoga, but what is your go-to yoga pose?
Ooh, I would say half moon.
Half moon?
I would demonstrate it here, but I'm worried I might knock something over.
Yeah, I don't know. We've never done that here.
I have not done as much in recent years as we joined a health club and I've been swimming more.
Okay.
So I've dropped off on the yoga a bit, but boy, what a great way to relieve stress. It is really hard to carry the stress through a yoga class with Sharon at Elm Tree.
All right. Well, hey, Eric, I appreciate your time. And again, thanks for joining us for Cheers to Careers. Cheers.
Steve, great to see you.